All right, so I like to start these things with a quote. And today I have success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in, day out. And I feel like Rocky LeGroon is the right person to talk to us about that. Now, Rocky is a seasoned sales development expert with over 25 years in sales development and training experience. He's a sales veteran, has worked in the areas of individual rep evaluation and analysis, development, in-depth training, sales management, customer service, and leadership. Rocky, how are you today?
Good morning, Zivko. I appreciate the opportunity to be a guest. I'm been looking forward to this since we first connected a few weeks ago.
I know it's been a while, and I'm very excited because um, I feel like there is a lot of gurus when it comes to sales, and you have the extremes where you're like, this is no way that I can do it, and then you also have people that are sharing thoughts and processes that you look at like there's no way I can actually implement them. So I'm hoping today we can talk about real life examples and stuff that you can actually do as opposed to pie in the sky, very entertaining kind of sales gurus methods. Now, before we get there. I'd like to learn a little bit more about your journey. How did you start and how did you end up where you are today?
Man, I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version. It really started with me in a vice president of a company, construction company in Dallas. I got married. My wife and I decided that we didn't want to raise kids in Dallas. She's from upstate New York. We decided that we were going to move to upstate New York to be closer to her family. Her family was a little bit less dysfunctional than mine. And we wanted to raise kids around a little more wholesome environment and a little smaller town. Um, so when we got married, 9 days later, we found out we were going to be having an addition to the family. And so we set a goal and a date 12 months out to move 1,500 miles away and kind of start over. And during that time, I felt like I might need a little polish. I needed a little bit of, confidence. While I was running a great company, we had 125 employees. I had grown it from 11 people to 125 within 3 years. It was on fire, but it's not where we wanted to be. So I signed up for a self development program called Dale Carnegie. Some might remember that, some might not. Fantastic program when you think about communication skills, self analysis, understanding, people, and it just really helped me. So, um, man, I won every award that they gave out in that program every week. And it wasn't like I was trying very hard. It was just kind of natural. And so I kind of, thought to myself, well, what if I could do this for a living? So I wound up working with them, kind of cut my teeth with that in the training and development business, got certified, with all of their programs, got, just made a huge difference in my life. And I wanted to help other people. And golly, within the first 4 months, I was number 10 in the country in sales. So it was sort of a natural, but I also had some great mentors. I studied a lot. I became a training junkie. And shortly after that, I left and got involved with a sales development franchise. Through there, got involved with some sales analysis tools and added those to my business. I left the franchise world and started a sales recruiting business. We nationalized that, franchised it, I sold it, and then we took all of the systems and processes and tools that we were using there
Yeah.
and kind of put them into a package and said, instead of doing this for a company, let's teach them how to do it and give them more control and give them a little better way to transfer those skill sets to them. So long story short, we've been in the sales development, sales analysis, sales hiring business for about 35 years. Probably worked with 200 different industries, 10,000 plus companies. So there's not a lot I haven't seen. I'm still learning and I still screw up like everybody else does. Um, But the idea is we're always getting better. We're always trying to learn. And so I believe that sales is the greatest career anyone could ever choose. And it's just my passion and my gift to be able to help salespeople, sales managers, sales teams grow a lot faster by thinking differently. And then when you think differently, different things come out of your mouth. So it's not technique, it's not, psychological, it's not, thought leader stuff. To me, it's like you can have all that and it's great, but at some point, somebody's going to pick up the phone. Somebody's got to reach out. Somebody's got to make a call. And today the world is different. I just had this conversation yesterday with a client. One of their salespeople will not pick up the phone unless they have sent information, unless they've sent an email, unless they've sent a LinkedIn post. And then it's like pulling teeth to get them to pick up the phone because this generation that seems to be coming into the workforce today, and they're good people. I don't want to give a bad impression, but they have a different mindset about how to communicate with people. And the challenge is if they're selling to their peers, it all works fine. But most of the salespeople today are selling to an older generation who doesn't have those same communication skills and wants to be communicated a different way. So, the rule is we've got to sell to our prospects the way they want to be sold to, not the way we want to sell. And so when you think about, sales hiring, sales development, building a sales organization, there's really two ways to go about it. You can buy companies and acquire, or you can grow organically. And either way, your sales team should be getting better and better and better. And it's interesting, every survey I've read in the last year or two says that over 50% of CEOs don't believe that their salespeople are making quota. Well, why would you allow that? I don't understand. If you if you change your location, if you change your office, if you change your warehouse, and salespeople said, "Well, I don't want to drive there anymore. It's too far for me. I don't want to go to that meeting." Would you allow it? If you change your email address, your URL, and somebody in accounting said, "Well, I don't want to use that email address anymore. I like my other email." What would they say? They wouldn't allow it, you know? So sales seems to be this fuzzy kind of like hard, slippery thing for, leaders to get a hold of, but it really is a science and there's data that backs that science. And it's an art and a science together. Salespeople aren't born no more than accountants are born. Salespeople are developed. The people that are attracted to sales typically have more tendencies to want to get involved, yes, but sales is a career of default. Nobody wakes up, and goes to career day and says, well, when I grow up, I want to be a salesperson. It just doesn't happen. So sales winds up being this kind of, you know, misaligned, mistreated stepchild of the organization that doesn't get the attention that they need, or it's overemphasized and they're micromanaged, and then they can't perform. So it's rare to find a company that has that balance. So long answer to your question. Sorry, it just kind of you get me going and I can't stop.
No, and that's the that's the right way of doing it because I don't want to I don't want to stop and switch just to cover some specific topics. I feel like you have so much expertise in these things and it naturally goes in that direction because naturally those are all the things that you mentioned are the stuff that I've seen in my company, I've seen with the clients that I work with. Um, it's it's kind of like what you mentioned. It's a misline or micromanaged. It's something that like, okay, we need more sales, and then kind of pops out of nowhere. There's no strategy behind it, but you do have a very clear strategy for your business development or your accounting. You have a very clear path of your finances. You check them every day. But when it comes to sales, it's like, okay, slap some numbers and off you go and hope you hit them. If you don't, then no, slap on the wrist and awkward conversations and then excuses, and it just becomes a whole mess without, like you said, it's an art and a science. There is a process of development, and when you started your development, it's fascinating to hear that it was with Dale Carnegie courses because he has I liked I have it here on the side. Stop Worrying and Start Living. That one was a very good one because as someone that starts that journey in the first, let's say, I would say less than 5 years, you worry about a lot of stuff
Oh
because
yeah,
you are
yeah.
kind
We
of
actually, as part of our development programs, teach stress and how to deal with stress because, no other career out there wakes up and has to go and face 70 to 80% failure. I mean, nobody in the company does that. Sure, you got, weathermen and baseball players that, can keep their jobs and be, 30% accurate or 70% failure. But, you mentioned something earlier. I just want to hitchhike on it if I can. And that's that, the company gives goals to salespeople. They say, here's your numbers. This is
yeah,
what you need to do. And, I'm not saying companies don't support them with resources to do that, but here's the problem. If I'm a salesperson and I get the company goals, a lot of times the only thing that causes me to want to hit those company goals is to keep from losing my job. And so what companies miss is being able to marry the individual personal goals with the company goals. So for example, zip code, if you take a salesperson who's making 100,000 a year, and in order to make that 100,000 a year, they've got to hit quota of 1 million, 10%. Let's just
yeah,
use those numbers for easy math. And then the company comes in and says, okay, well, now this year you've got to hit 1.5 million. But the salesperson is comfortable and happy making 100,000. And the gap, 500,000 in revenue for the company, doesn't really mean much to that individual. But if somebody were to sit down with that individual salesperson and say, okay, you're comfortable, you're happy, you're doing fine at 100,000. What can we help you discover about yourself? What can we help you recognize about what you want, what you need in the future? And it's not about the money, it's about what you can do with the money. You know, can they raise their own bar? Can they, if they want to take a week off and go to Habitat for Humanity, if they want to make more donations to their community, if they want to be more involved in organizations, if they want to be able to give more, if they want to set aside a college fund. But what are those personal goals that are going to cause that individual to must make 150,000? And so that's what creates that internal motivation for the salesperson. And if the only thing that's driving them is to keep their job, you don't have a good marriage. You don't have a good partnership. And so companies really miss the boat with sales managers not knowing what motivates their salespeople, with companies not recognizing that money is not always the answer and throwing bonuses and perks and those kinds of things at salespeople. We know today that 78% of salespeople are motivated intrinsically, not extrinsically. We worked with a call center years ago, and what they had for a reward was ostrich covered briefcases. So there was about 450 people in the call center that we trained. And if they hit their goals, they got a ostrich covered briefcase. Well, what is somebody in a call center going to do with an ostrich covered briefcase except give it away at Christmas for a present? They're not going to use it. They don't need that. So
right.
what we discovered and put in place was get rid of these briefcases. What we know people want is free time off. Let's put some contest in place. Let's put some things that motivate and inspire the salespeople, that cause salespeople to work that extra little bit, to make those 2 extra calls a day, to sit and ask more questions when they've been told no, to sit in the chair, to stay on the line, to not hang up first. What's going to drive them to push to displace the competition more professionally and effectively? What's going to cause them to qualify more? What's going to cause them to get more appointments, to ask for referrals and get those referrals? So that's one of the things, and I'm sorry I get so long-winded about this stuff, but obviously I'm very passionate about it. And I think There's a lot of things that companies can do that are really small things that make a huge difference long term.
I feel like you're covering like it's aha moments, but they're so obvious that yeah,
Yeah.
everybody that comes in sales will say I'm money driven because they have to hit quotas. There's nothing else that you can do. Like if you're an account manager, you can maybe increase retention and you can do referrals. But when it comes to sales, like that is basically the job. It's not like the end of it all. It is the job. I have to do that.
Yeah.
That is the byproduct of me working. And when you look at people wanting time off, all of a sudden I can feel if there was like 100 owners, they're like, ooh, time off. Who's going to do sales? Who's going to
It's
do this?
free time off. It's free time off, right? So I don't get charged for that time off. But you know what? If you're making quota, I don't care what you do. If you're not making quota, then you got to do it my way.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to do it my way, then maybe this is not the place for you. And so when companies raise the bar and they raise expectations and they raise individual, help them raise their own bar, one of two things will happen. Those people will either grow beyond expectations or they'll go away because they don't want to work for a company that's going to hold them accountable and push the limits and continue to drive and grow. And so a true sales culture is really hard to develop because most companies start as something else. And sales is the necessary evil, right? They have an engineering culture. They have a manufacturing culture. They have a service culture. They have a technology culture. And so the way to define what is your culture is when you're making decisions at the leadership table, what is the driver for that decision? Is it to enhance engineering? Is it to enhance profitability? Is it to enhance process? Is it to enhance service? Or is it for sales? And if you make decisions based on how your decisions are going to impact sales, everything else will flow because this is your revenue engine, right? And if you don't have sales, nothing else happens. But when you have sales, it solves all problems.
It's true. Sales is it's a like you mentioned, like a necessary evil, but when it comes to making the decisions, I think a lot of people just have like numbers, like quotas, and I just need. There's no reason why you want to hit it, but oh, because Jimmy has $250,000 and Bob has a $5 million company, I'm somewhere in between. I need to push that way for no particular reason. There's no reason why. And then once you kind of go in that journey, you're like, I hate my life, I hate my job, I don't want to do this for the money. All of a sudden, money is the problem, as opposed to, like you mentioned, what is the decision behind that? What is the driver behind that decision when you're making these sales jumps and these targets? It's very rarely clearly defined. It's usually kind of like a necessary evil. Now, what I like about the process you were explaining, if you hit the quota, fantastic. Give them free time off. Give them what they really are feeling it's important for their life. If they don't do it my way, and if that doesn't work, then probably this is not the right way of, this is not the right career, or this company is not the right one for you. Now, everybody has the best intentions in the beginning, both the owner and the person that is applying for the job. Can you walk me
Sure.
through the right way of hiring sales champions?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking. That's a loaded question. The right way. We've helped companies hire over 10,000 salespeople over the years. And you can't hire salespeople like you hire everybody else, right? I mean, salespeople are dysfunctional, and I can say that because I are one. But I think what's important is to look at how do companies go about hiring salespeople? And typically they hire salespeople like they hire everybody else, right? So most of the time, whether it's a salesperson or somebody else, they're going to decide, hey, we need to fill this position. Okay. They take the job description. Well, I've never seen a job description that identifies the ideal salesperson, right? It identifies the tasks, the jobs, the duties, the, money you're going to get paid. It's just, and it's usually copied off the internet from somebody that's a similar company or some other junk that somebody wrote. And they give that to somebody in the company, say, write an ad. And they go write the ad. And then candidates send in resumes. Well, I've never seen a bad resume. Have you?
No, all
I
very good.
mean, they're all superheroes. Every salesperson makes President's Club, right? And so they look at the resumes, they line it up with what they believe the job description is. They look at the history. They think about, they were in similar organizations. And so they have experience in my market. And then they interview. And who's better at interviewing, salespeople or the person that's doing the interviewing? Salesperson.
Yeah.
They're out meeting with people all day long. They're a lot better at first impressions. They're good at telling you what you think you want to hear. They're good at answering those tough questions that aren't really tough. And then they might bring them back for a second interview. They might have an interview with somebody else. They might, have 3 or 4 interviews. Well, great salespeople don't stay on the shelf that long. And so then they bring them back. They finally make them an offer. The salesperson accepts, and they pin a $20 bill to their collar and say, "Good luck. Go get them, Tiger." Well, if you kind of compare that to hiring an engineer or an office manager, it's that process works, the traditional process, because they don't have dysfunction. It does matter that specific experience that they've identified. The education matters. The capabilities that they've shown in the past matter a lot more than sales. And so you hire an engineer, they come on board, you give them a couple of weeks of training and mentoring and teach them what they need to know. And pretty much after a month or two, they kind of meld into the company and become a functional, productive part. With sales, when you hire them, they're competing in the marketplace against your competitors. They're competing internally for attention for the sales managers. They're competing for the Glengarry leads. They're completing, so it's a whole different game. So what we suggest is the first thing that we want to help somebody do is really identify what does that ideal salesperson look like? What do they sound like? What do they do? What are the strengths? What are the skills? What are the necessary behaviors? What are the attitudes they need to have? What's the environment that they're going to be in? Who are they selling to? What level in the organization? What's the sales cycle? What kind of resistance do they face in the marketplace? What price points are they going to be asking for? And so there's about, let's call it at least 100 things that we need to identify about this ideal salesperson. Then when we've identified them, we write an ad that's pretty non-traditional, and we wrap that identification with some psychographics, if you will. So once we know what that person looks like, we kind of identify, well, where do they spend their time? Where do they go? What do they do? And then we write an ad that describes them, and we put it in places where they're going to be. And that's not always LinkedIn or Indeed or Career Builder, right? We had a mortgage company we worked with a few years back. And when we did this identification, I mean, think about a mortgage broker. They're sitting in an office, a cube, most of the time.
Yeah.
They are taking leads. They're calling people. They're getting applications. They're filling out forms, and then they pass it along. Well, when we looked at this marketplace, they had some call centers with about 5,000 employees that were in 15 miles of this office that we were working with. Well, what are those people in those call centers doing? They're sitting in a queue. They're making calls. They're taking calls. They're filling out paperwork. They're working on the computer at the same time. And they're passing it down the line. They're doing some suggestive selling. They're asking some tough questions. They're, helping people solve problems. So when we wrote the ad, we placed it, instead of on the normal job boards, on the placemats of the diners around those call centers. We put it in those glass cases in the bathrooms of the bars near those call centers. Man, within a couple of weeks, we had hundreds of applicants. And we were able to hire 6 people in 90 days with a sales manager. And it was fantastic. So once we write the ad, then we help people figure out where to place the ad. And then we want to start the interview process very differently, right? You can't ask salespeople, hey, are you willing to make cold calls? Everybody says yes. Hey, this is, going to require these functions. Oh yeah, I love doing that. Yeah, we can do that. And so we teach a very strict, very short disqualification phone screen. We help people turn that interview into an audition by asking the right questions to expose the strengths and the weaknesses. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. And salespeople, again, we can't just ask straight up questions because they're going to give us an answer they think we want to get. So we're going to ask them 2, 3-part, 4-part questions that really expose what's going to happen 90 days later. And then, of course, we use an assessment. And this assessment is sales based. It's not personality. It's not behavioral. It's not aptitude. It's not that stuff off the shelf. This is customized to the client where we're identifying 180 unique findings that are customized and weighted based on the job and the company and the environment and the necessary behaviors. And it identifies, does that person have that hardcore grit? Will they be able to get through the tough things? Will they be able to, have the right skill set for who they're selling to? Will they have the unconscious biases that produce positive outcomes, or will they have long sales cycles? Will they not be able to make phone calls? Will they, get in the wrong situation at the wrong time? Can they have the right money conversations? So by the interview, the assessment, and then the next interview and an onboarding plan, we see a 95% success rate with companies that we install this sales hiring process with. And the 5% that don't have success don't listen.
Usually how it works. Yo,
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, again, I'm sorry. I'm so long winded this morning. People probably get tired of hearing my voice, but I do have a great face for radio.
nice. Well, I think all the stuff that you're sharing and you're kind of walking us through of the process that you guys do and the one that you've been doing for so many years is very different. And I think you're just kind of drawing and pulling us all in because it's very different. Because we've done it. I've done it. I know clients of mine that have done it where, yeah, you go through the sales process. You go through a hiring process of a sales rep, and once you're done, 90 days, and I think 90 days is like the nice
Yeah.
point where you're like, how did I make this mistake? How did I make such a bad mistake? And you reflect on yourself because you made the decision, you put out the ad, you did all the interviews, and like, how did I kind of mismanage this so badly because it's not going in the right direction? And we're getting to a point where the sales rep shows on the call, kind of head down, dodging questions, kind of just want to leave and do nothing for the rest of the day because they're not motivated anymore. It got to the point where they don't see the future, or they feel like, well, um, I wasn't told exactly how this would be. I wasn't given the whole honest truth. And I've been
Yeah.
in situations where I don't know why some companies do that. I was when I started, I was a sales rep. You sit on that interview, you agree to a bunch of stuff. You're like, okay, I'm super hyped. This will be fantastic. You do your math. Once you start hitting goals, it'll take you some time, but once you start hitting goals, like this will make sense financially, and I can have the other stuff, the non-monetary things that I like. You start in, you right away, you're like, wow, they gave me aspirations. They didn't give me real numbers. Their sales
Yes.
cycle
Yeah.
is not what they said, it's like 2 times longer. The targets that I would have, like a list to go through, it is
Yeah.
cold. It is people they don't want to talk to them at all. Like I pick up the phone and start screaming, swearing. So the list is not true. The sales cycle is way longer.
Yeah.
And the way to hit those commissions is close to impossible because once you start asking questions, no one has hit them in the last 3 years. So you
Right.
feel set to fail. Um,
So companies have a tendency to misrepresent
yeah,
what the real opportunity is. They always, they're up here. They're like, oh, you can make $1 million. Well, really? Has anybody made $1 million in this position? You know,
exactly.
has anybody proven that? So yeah, there's that part of the employer side that should happen in the second interview, and that should be part of the 90-day onboarding plan. There's about 60 things the new employee needs to know by the end of the 90 days. And so what we help companies do is really, especially for those companies that, like you say, they've been burned. They make bad decisions about sales hires. And it only takes two or three of those. And the company leader says, I'm not hiring any more salespeople. It doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work for the wrong reasons that you think it doesn't work. It's not you. You just don't know what you don't know. It's you learned your product, you learned your technology, you learned your stuff, you know all the other stuff, but you never learned sales or how to hire salespeople. And even larger companies where you may have somebody in HR or comptroller or even CFO sometimes, even the sales manager. Sometimes they're the ones that are charged with sales hiring. And the challenge is they're not the ones in front of the CEO at the end of the year saying, why didn't we hit our sales numbers? Right? So
Right.
they don't have a skin in the game. They
Hmm.
do their best, but they don't know any more about it than anybody else. So
Right.
why not have, if you have an expert accountant that you rely on to file your taxes, you have an expert attorney to deal with legal problems, you have an expert in employee benefits, but companies don't often have a sales expert that they rely on. They think the sales manager or the VP of sales is their sales expert. But if you look at a typical VP who might be 20 years in sales, sales leadership, sales management, they might have worked with 100, maybe 500 salespeople, but they don't have the experience of hiring 10,000 people or working with 5,000 plus salespeople a year. So I think part of it is that leadership mindset. Sales is just this fuzzy, slippery thing, but it doesn't have to be. It can be the science and hard data that we provide.
And if someone if someone doesn't have the science and the data, and you're like, look, I know you're trying to get to a specific point because you're grinding it, you're looking at your first or third or fifth hiring. Um, you're like, look, if I can give you like three, four tips or three, four things to not do, what will be the top like 3 to 5 mistakes that happen when someone that is in the process in the beginning that they're learning, but they need to hire it in order to grow? That you were like, these are the mistakes that you are making definitely when you're hiring sales reps.
Yeah, number one is they don't take the time to identify the ideal salesperson. A lot of people think sales is sales, but there is actual science behind identifying your ideal salesperson. We call it B.A.S.E, behaviors, attitudes, skills, and environment. And then a second mistake people make is the onboarding plan. They don't have a robust onboarding plan that identifies who's going to do what when, what are the topics, who's going to address that with the new hire, what are the realistic expectations, who's going to manage it, who's going to hold them accountable, who's going to keep them motivated, who's going to teach them the sales process, who's going to teach them the objections, who's going to teach them. I mean, you think about a company that's hiring somebody, you got a whole lot to learn about the company itself and the market and the clients and the products and the services and how they package together, the proposals, all the resources, the CRM, everything. Well, there's that much more about just the sales side of things. What are the stages of the sales? Who's the typical prospect? How do you get to them? So there's a whole bunch of things there. So they missed that 90-day onboarding plan. So those are two. I think the third thing is interviewing. They don't interview effectively to expose the strengths and weaknesses. They interview to sell the company and sell the position. They interview to look at characteristics and kind of gut feel. And history and surveys and data shows that interviewing is only 14% accurate. And then they say, well, I can't get the right people. So writing the ad is really important and getting that right pool of candidates. They say there's no candidates out there today. Well, I disagree because there's 18 million salespeople in the US alone. And they change jobs every 18 months. So there's a constant pool of salespeople that are out there. What we don't want is that salesperson that can't sell, and we don't want the salesperson who can sell. We want the salesperson who will sell. And there's a big difference there. So I think those are four places that we find companies typically have the biggest challenge. And then that challenge shows up 90, 120 days out. Another question zip code people ask me a lot is, when should I expect my salesperson to be producing? Well, let's take your sales cycle plus 30 days. So if you got a sales cycle of 90 days, add 30 days to that, and that's when you should expect that salesperson to be producing. If you got a 180-day sales cycle, add 30 days to it. So within 30 days, they should have enough information to have an intelligent conversation with a prospect.
I I definitely agree with that because I've been in a position where someone um hired me and the question I had in mind, like when do you expect to see results? They were like day one. I was like, okay, this is not gonna work
Not
because
realistic. Yeah,
I know, like
not
even if you
realistic.
bring the janitor day one, they were like, okay, what is the security code? Okay, what do I do this? You know what? We'll pass through the whole thing. Tell me what you think the next day. We'll clean every like even as someone that is just you like, okay, I need you to do just one thing. You will give them more than one day. But sales rep is like, I need you to do like day one. Like, okay, sure, we'll give it all, and it just goes in a downward slope from that point, I would say. But this, I feel like it's a realistic framework. Take your
Yeah,
sales cycle and be honest with it. Even if take the worst case scenario, if you have a 6 weeks and you're like, well, most of the time it's 6 weeks, but I have 9 weeks,
yeah,
so take 9 weeks plus 30 days. And I feel like even the person that you're hiring will like, okay, this company is actually looking for um, a long-term success and they have everything in place. They're not setting unrealistic expectations and applying ridiculous stress because they're in a crunch. Will they make salary? Will they make the bonuses? How will this
yeah.
just set up a really, really bad tone with that kind of first impression and setting expectations that are of that nature?
Absolutely. And then
Um,
if I could just insert this here,
yeah,
zip code. The fifth thing, and I think one of the most important, is A players won't work for B managers. So the sales manager, whoever that is, if it's the principal led owner that's, the sales manager or acting sales manager, that manager has got to be really good at coaching. They've got to be really good at holding people accountable. That doesn't mean being mean and ugly and, hard on people. Accountability comes with consequences and rewards. And without those two, you don't have accountability. That sales manager's got to be a strong motivator. And I'm not sure that we can motivate anybody, but we've got to be able to inspire them and know what motivates them. And then we can leverage that. And so when you think about who's this new sales hire going to be reporting to, that makes a huge difference in whether or not it's successful. Because if you hire a strong salesperson and you got a weak sales management, it's not going to work.
it's true. It's true. And I think what you mentioned about A players, how they would work with big managers, it's if they see that I'm way better than this person, why are they the manager? I can outperform them. Just give me like, 6 months or a year. I will. Then it's more of a because it's competition.
Yeah,
You're competing with competitors, but you're also competing internally. That's when things start to, I would say, deteriorate because the A player sees they can be better and they start to undermine. And if you in the company right now don't have someone that is strong to take on people that are exactly what you said, identify the right salesman and you bring people that are really good, but your manager is not up to par,
they're
it's
not going to
not
stay.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. And
It's
so companies either outgrow their employees or employees outgrow their companies. And so from a sales development standpoint, the goal is to grow together. And if you can do that, you will grow beyond your expectations, way beyond your expectations. If you can't do that, it's going to be turmoil and you're going to get stuck at a certain point. And we call that the ceiling of complexity. And when you get stuck, and that's usually, for smaller businesses up to about 1 million, and then from 1 million to about 5 million, and you get stuck in those places. And then from 5 million to 10 or 12, and then from 10 to 12 to 25. And those numbers typically are where people struggle. They get to a certain point, and the problem is you can't run a $25,000 business, a $25 million business, like you run a $10 million business. You can't run a $5 million business like you run a 10. And so the thing that people miss, and people have heard this before, this is nothing new, but what is new is how do you get through it quicker? How do you get through that ceiling complexity? And so what keeps them from getting to that next ceiling If you want a $25 million business and you are now at 10 million, you have to immediately start running your business like it's 25 million. And when you start doing that, you have to change systems, you got to change processes, you got to change styles, you got to change a lot of things that you're doing to get there. Well, the sooner you start acting and running and daily activities like that, the sooner you'll get there.
So it feels like if you want to where you want to be, you basically are starting now. If you are at 10 and you want to be at 25, start running it as if it's 25, meaning setting those processes and operations as opposed
Yeah.
to as you're growing, you're hitting problems that you drop, then you keep hitting that a ceiling of complexity.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
So
good.
we've got to be able to identify where is that sitting in complexity and what are the trigger points for growth.
It's a good way of looking at it. I think a lot of people go um the opposite way where you're like, okay, let's grow and then we'll figure it out as we're growing. And
Yeah.
then sometimes you don't figure it out and then
That's why you don't grow.
yeah.
That's
Um
exactly why you don't grow.
when you're doing sales, there's all kinds of different ones. Um, I think we used to define them as like hard sell, soft sell.
Yeah.
Like a car salesperson, really hard. They need to come up there like super quick on their feet, thinking of things, trying to identify really fast, but not to hit a nerve because then you come across too salesy or someone that is taking their time because it's a I don't know, maybe it can be like enterprise software. They know that there's going to be whining and dining and a lot of calls and a lot of meetings, building a relationship and seeing how this goes. And I think nowadays is more of transactional sales and more account management sales. And most of the people nowadays are focusing on the account management sales and kind of combining the account manager and demanding sales out of them, referrals,
Yeah.
buying more of the service or more units of the service. Do you feel like that's a unrealistic expectation, or do you feel like it's not you're not preparing your account managers for sales, therefore your top guys are basically dropping because they don't like to do what you're asking?
Yeah, I think a lot of times the challenge with an organization is they've grown to a certain level. They have the salespeople that make the sales, but then they also service the client. And that's two different skill sets. And you can have that in one person, but it really is two different types of salespeople. The other thing that seems to be happening in today's world is client services is now account management. And so, put it in simple terms, account management is you get a list of accounts and your job is to go and work with those accounts, build true trust and relationship with those accounts. And when I say build relationships, I mean so well that you infect the entire company. So when that person that has been buying from us leaves, and they are going to leave at some point, and the new one comes in, they're not allowed to bring their people with them. And that's what real account management is, as well as expanding those accounts and finding other opportunities. So I think client services has a whole lot more opportunity than companies give them credit for. I don't think they see that opportunity. I think also those people that were hired for those positions, sales was not part of that role. And now they're saying, hey, you got to sell. And so that makes people uncomfortable because that's not what they signed up for. But I also think it's because their mentality about what sales is not reality. So you mentioned two extremes. One, car sales, which is typically a 1 to 2 call close. People are more so buying than the salesperson is selling or just not getting in the way. You look at 18-month sales cycles, $200 million enterprise software programs, SaaS, monthly recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue. Somebody sells it and then it goes over to client services. Well, each one is different. Each one has its own weight of what skills are required and necessary. But you know what, Zivko, the fundamentals never change. It doesn't matter what we're selling. We have to find somebody to talk to. We have to let them trust us more than they trust the competition. We have to put many steps in place to get to where we want to go. We have to find reasons and compelling reasons why they need to do something different. A lot of people might call that discovery. We've got to talk about building a business case and economics, because if that doesn't work, it's a waste of time. And then we got to be talking to the right people who have the authority to make the call. And too many times people are talking to somebody who can't say yes, but they can say no. So once we, lay out the foundation, it never changes. It's the application of those fundamentals that change.
Application of the fundamentals. And you're right, like um, you might want to change your style, but what happens at the end of the day, the steps that you are doing to move the sale, whether
Yeah.
that be 90 days or 18 months, it will kind of still be the same. And it sounds like there's a lot of opportunities when it comes to client service that companies are either not using it or they feel like if I start asking my account managers to do these things, they will not feel comfortable. They've tried, they don't feel comfortable. But here the problem is a kind of what they see as sales is not reality. So more of a training and kind of showing opportunities. Again, going back to the first thing that you were mentioning, where it may not be monetary compensation, it may be free time off. It may be some other things to show them, look, this is what we're going to do. We can go through this whole process together and this is kind of what the outcomes are, or you can stick to account management and just not participate, which is also an opportunity. But the
Yeah.
companies should at least start those processes because there's a lot of expanding, growing opportunities when it comes to client
Yeah.
services.
And companies evolve and companies change and their sales organizations evolve and change, right? So let me, and I know we only have a few minutes left, but let me leave you with kind of a health story. You look a little younger than I am, so good for you. Um, but have you ever had plantar fasciitis? You ever heard of it?
I haven't heard of it.
Well, when you get older, you may have it because men tend to have this happen in their 50s, 60s. But basically, the arch of your foot falls and
Okay, I know what that is.
that stretches the tendons on the bottom of your feet. And
Yes.
it is painful. I had it for almost 2 years, both feet, couldn't hardly walk. I mean, it was just painful. I iced my feet. I went on the internet. I bought all these gadgets. Went to doctors and nothing seemed to work. And I'm like, I don't want to live like this the rest of my life.
Right.
Well, I was at a wedding and I ran into a young man who was a physical therapist. And I said, man, I hate to make you work at this wedding, but I got to ask you, I mean, what do you do for plantar fasciitis? And he says, ice your calves. I'm like, well, my calves don't hurt. He said, your calves are what's pulling on the bottom of your feet. I'm like, okay. I iced my calves 2 nights in a row. I've never had another problem. And that was 5 years ago. I was honest. So the lesson about that is what people think the problem is not always the root cause of the problem. So when we work with an organization, the first thing we do is analyze top to bottom. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the hidden weaknesses that neutralize the strengths? What are the strategies? Are there conflicts there? What are the systems and processes that are in place? How do we identify the ideal salesperson for each particular role? And then let's measure their strengths and skills against that company model and determine who needs what and how much of they need to get to where we need to go.
Right. Well, Rocky, I don't have a hard stop. If you have some time, we can keep going.
I got a call at 11.
Got it. So what I'm
So
going
I'm
to do
sorry
is,
you may have to cut that out. I don't know.
no, that's perfectly fine. What I'm going to say is, we're coming close to the end. So if people want to get a hold of you, how did they do that?
There's only one Rocky LeGrone on the internet. It's just me. You
Sure.
can type in Rocky LeGrone. You'll find me. You can go to my website, salesdevelopmentexpert.com. You can look me up on LinkedIn, Rocky LeGrone. We'd love to have some conversation with you, whoever might be listening that has been struggling with growing their business, who feels like their salespeople got so much more potential than they're showing. Even PE companies and organizations that are doing mergers and acquisitions. The question is, who's in the right seat? How do we make sure we keep the right people and leverage this organization as it grows? If you're looking to hire salespeople and you've struggled and you can't afford to make another mistake, we'd love to talk to you. Whether or not we can work together, we don't know yet, but I'll help you any way I can. So thank you for asking, and thank you for allowing me to be your guest. I'm sorry I talked too much today.
No, I was. It's very fascinating to listen to over 25 years of experience, and you're showing all that. This is what I was kind of expecting and looking forward to the real stuff behind it all, not just some fluff and motivational
Yeah.
things and someone screaming and yelling at you and kind of. It's more like these are the processes. There's systems. There's things in place you have to do. You're asking the wrong questions. It's not just about money at the end of the day for a lot of people, and take accountability for proper setups in 90 days, onboardings, and all the real things that if you really want to understand how you work, definitely reach out to talk to you. And if there are some things like, look, I'm too small, I'm in the growing phase, you can extract a lot of information from everything you shared today. So I'm very grateful. Thank you, Rocky.
Thank you. Let me leave you, if I can, just one more example. Because
Absolutely.
you mentioned real stuff. I want to give you some real stuff. A lot of companies, when you ask them, okay, how much new business did the salespeople bring in? And the answer is usually not enough. And then it's like, okay, we need to work on prospecting. We need to work on new business. Well, the challenge is, I mean, you could hire me, you could hire a multitude of people to come in and teach prospecting. The challenge is salespeople aren't going to do it if they have high need for approval and if they get emotionally involved very quickly. And those are two unconscious biases that we measure and look at up front. So instead of paying somebody to teach prospecting that's not going to have any long term equity, pay to get your salespeople evaluated and looked at to know exactly what the problem is and how to fix it. You can buy stuff off the internet or you can ice your calves.
Right.
That's what we like to do is fix the cause of the problem. So, Zivko, thank you very much.